did a fermentation workshop with Brad.
That's what he was telling me. That's how we kind of got on about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we just did that on Saturday, so it was cool to hear.
Right. How'd it go?
It was good. Yeah, it went really well. I feel like things like fermentations, making your own like bread and sauerkraut and stuff like that is very trendy right now. Like a lot of people are kind of keen to learn more skills like that. So yeah, it was super popular. People loved it, and yeah.
Do you do that yourself, like at home at all? Is that something that you got into, or
I have since Saturday because I did the workshop.
Like okay.
So now I've got some sauerkraut at home. But
okay. So what were you guys doing? Like, what was the class or the course? Like, what did you guys do?
Yeah, it was kind of generally about fermentation, but then like practically speaking, we just made sauerkraut.
Okay.
But just as both like something that's fun and interesting, but also a way of lengthening the shelf life of your food.
Right.
So like canning and preserving are good ways to improve food security, because things that you might not know what to do with or are starting to kind of go bad in your fridge, you can just preserve it and then keep it for longer. So
what was your
good life skill?
What was your biggest takeaway from that course?
My biggest takeaway?
Yeah, like something that you've learned that really kind of stood out with you a bit.
I think Brad was just like, just go for it, like just try it. I think anything that's like fermentation, people tend to get freaked out that they're going to somehow mess it up and like, I don't know, get botulism or something like that. But he was like, it's like actually really hard to do that. So just kind of give things a whirl. Don't be afraid to get your hands messy kind of thing.
Yeah. And how long was it? Like
the workshop?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just an hour and a half.
Nice. And how many people did you guys have?
We usually aim for like 10 to 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anything that's too much bigger, it just becomes like, it's less kind of, I don't know, people feel less connected. So we had about 10 people out, yeah.
And how did you guys like market that? Like, was that through Food Stash or like?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, through Food Stash, and I think we promoted it through a couple of our community partners as well.
Nice.
So.
Was it like did more people wanted to come? Like, did you guys get fully booked and then you're like, oh, we can't have any more people?
Yeah, we ran this one because the first time we ran it, it was like so popular that people were looking for spots, so we were like, let's just do it again. So
okay. And do people pay for that, or like is it a volunteer? Like okay.
Yeah, some of our events we run at no cost or on like a sliding scale, but this one we ran as like a fundraiser, so there was a cost, and
that's cool.
Also to pay for like the equipment and stuff, because people go home with like a little setup, and yeah.
Nice. And like, is it typically like just like more like what's like the age demographic? Like, is it all kinds of people, everybody kind of just joining in, or was it just like young people? Because it's an in thing, right? So
I feel like 20 to 40-ish was like kind of the...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's like middle age, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So I think we're filming. Are we doing that? Okay, cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, first of all, welcome to the show, the Table 604 show.
Thank you.
Thanks again for coming on. So what we'll be doing is just like kind of, again, going through like a casual conversation and just talking a little bit more about Food Stash. But first, maybe you can talk about yourself, like present yourself and like kind of talk about your like childhood and how you got into Food Stash, and just go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so my name is Heather Gerrie, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Food Stash Foundation. I've been in Vancouver for about 5 years now, and I have Food Stash for 2 of those years. Originally, I'm from Ontario. I grew up in like rural Ontario, north of Toronto, and I moved to Halifax to do my bachelor's, and was there for a few years, and then swapped coasts and moved to Vancouver 5 years ago. I feel like I've always had an interest in food. Like, I grew up in a family where like my mom had really big gardens. When we were kids, she just gave us each our own garden plot and was like, grow whatever you want, like go for it. I only grew potatoes. I was like, that's what I want to eat, so that's what I'm going to grow. But yeah, just kind of food. And yeah, it was like just a super important part of growing up, like really emphasize like eating local and the importance of that, which is funny because I think when you're a kid, like that stuff, you're like, okay, sure, eating local sounds great. And now it's funny because that's like the industry I work in is food security, and realizing that that's actually super important to think about our food systems and where our food is coming from. But my background is more in neuroscience, actually. So my bachelor's and my master's are both more in brain health. So my interest in food and I think was kind of always there. I really like cooking. I've always really liked baking, kind of getting my hands messy in the kitchen. But it was in my master's actually that I got really interested in the connection between brain health and mental health and food and what we eat, and just learning more about how diet and the food that we eat, how that impacts our overall health. But I got really interested in brain health in particular. And when I finished school, I started working in the downtown east side at a drop-in center. I just was looking for something after school that was like direct impact, working directly with people out in the community. And I loved it. I'm still really connected in that community. And yeah, I just really, really fell in love with that community and that kind of work. But it was really interesting just having the background that I have in brain health and just seeing the food that folks have access to when you're on a fixed income or on no income or have a really tight budget. The food that gets donated to drop-in centers or shelters, that kind of thing, is often just, yeah, like really sugary pastries, really processed food, lots of refined sugar and carbs. And it just kind of like really stuck with me because I was like, how is this impacting people's health when this is the only food they have access to, and it's pretty inflammatory food, especially if you've already got a lot of complex mental health challenges going on, and then this is the food that you have access to is really not supporting your health. So that's where Food Stash kind of ties in, because at the drop-in center I was working at, we got donations from Food Stash, so I heard about them through that, and a job opened up, and yeah, ended up kind of transitioning from one nonprofit to another, and it's been a couple years now at Food Stash, and yeah, really enjoying it. But that's kind of my trajectory in life and also in the food world.
Right. And do you see yourself like being part of that organization for a while, or like do you see yourself doing that for like a long term kind of thing? Or
Yeah, I definitely feel pretty settled there right now, and I think it's just been really interesting working in the space that I do because we're so connected to so many different community partners, other nonprofits, community organizations, that I think that's really shaped kind of what I see myself doing in the future. Because when you're working at the grassroots level and have exposure to just seeing all these different kind of community organizations, it's just such a great space to work in, like really meaningful, valuable work, and just a really great community of people to be working alongside. Yeah.
Interesting. And so, what was it like mostly about Food Stash that kind of like really like attracted you the first time? Because obviously you heard about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was the moment like when you're like, oh, I would really like to join this organization? Like, what was that moment?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about Food Stash is that the mission of Food Stash is both environmental and social. So it felt like I didn't have to pick between two things that I care about. Like, it's both really emphasizing environmental justice and trying to reduce the emissions related to food waste and having a really positive impact on the environment. So there's that side of it. But then it's also really social focused, and how do we get food out to folks who need it. So I think that was a real moment where I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense to me, where it's like these two challenges intersect, and it makes sense that we'd be trying to address both environmental and social issues where they intersect. And yeah.
Okay, interesting. Now I know like you mentioned there's like two different routes a little bit, like you're helping like the community a bit and like also like the food waste and everything. Like maybe we can separate both for just a second here. So can you tell us a little bit more like how does the company work? Like, how does it work? Do people just bring food in and that's it? Or do you guys do like events? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about like the food side of things at Food Stash?
Yeah, I'll give you just kind of an overview of what we do. So like I said, our mission is both environmental and social. So on the environmental side of things, we're trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated with food waste, which is, I think it's a bit of an invisible contributor to the climate crisis, but it's really significant. So if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions globally, behind the US and China. So it's a massive area for us to look at and try to figure out solutions to. But at the same time, in Canada, Specifically, 58% of the food that we produce goes to waste. So over half of what we produce is wasted. And all of that wasted food produces greenhouse gas emissions in a couple different ways. One, when it ends up in the landfill, it doesn't have access to oxygen, so it doesn't decompose and produce carbon dioxide, which is what happens when you compost properly. It produces methane gas. So that's one challenge. And the second is just all the resources that go into producing food. So all of the fuel that goes into agriculture, shipping food around the world, refrigerating it the whole time, all these different steps. If that food is lost, then all of those greenhouse gas emissions associated with food production are also wasted. So there's that kind of side of things. So what we do is we go to grocery stores and wholesalers, sometimes farms, and we collect their surplus food. So that's food that is close to the best before date. With produce, it's food that is sometimes deemed not marketable because it has like a nick or a bruise in it, or it's just imperfect looking. For whatever reason, it's overstocked, things like that. And in Canada, there's no regulations against just throwing out food that's surplus. Like there's no regulation that you have to compost it or donate it out or distribute it somehow. So we work with about 35 different grocery stores in Vancouver, collect their surplus. And so that's the environmental side of things. And then on the social side of things, it's like, hey, we've got people in the city going hungry, but there's all this food that's going to waste. So let's redistribute that to people who need it. So we support about 35 charities in Vancouver that have meal programs. So it's places like shelters, drop-in centers, housing societies, really anywhere that has a meal program. And about 80% of the food that we rescue goes towards those community partners. And then the remaining 20% comes back to our warehouse, and we package it into food bags for delivery. So we support about 125 households per week. We deliver right to their door. So for us, it's a really great program because we're able to support and prioritize folks who are on disability or have some kind of accessibility challenge that makes it actually really difficult to get out of the house, stand in line for a long time at a food bank, lug a heavy bag of groceries home. Like that's really challenging for a lot of people. So we deliver to those folks, and then we also run a market, so people come to us. It's just once a week, and they can get their groceries there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, when you guys go to grocery stores, like, I'm not sure if you're allowed to share, like, the specific grocery stores. You don't have to, but, like, is it, like, some of the biggest chains as well, like Save On Foods and Whole Foods, like, as an example? Or is it just mostly, like, smaller ones?
No, it's a mix of both. So, yeah, all of the kind of big names that you can think of, we work with the majority of them. And we do have a few smaller, more local grocery chains as well.
Okay. And, excuse me. So how does that start? Like, because maybe this started probably a while ago, maybe before you started working there, but like, how does that work? Like, did like Food Stash, like some members would go to the grocery store and just say, hey, like we're doing a program and like that's it? Or is there a little bit more of a process behind that? Like, is it like people just sign papers and that's it? Or like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so Food Stash started in 2017 and it was founded by David Schein, and he is a teacher in Vancouver. He watched the documentary Just Eat It, which is based in Vancouver, and felt really convicted and inspired about the volume of food that goes to waste that is good food that could be used. So he left teaching and started Food Stash. And so like very humble beginnings, just like a van, going to grocery stores, asking for their surplus. When volunteers came on board, it was all just like out of a basement, packaging stuff up, delivering it to households. And we've evolved quite a bit from there. So we rescued over 1 million pounds of food in 2022. Wow. We've got a team with about 5 drivers. We're out on the road 7 days a week collecting from grocery stores, and are just able to support hundreds of households and individuals through our community partners each week. So that's kind of the trajectory. Yeah. That's
awesome. And do you see that number like kind of going up with people like needing more food and things like that?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So during COVID, with people getting laid off and all the supply chain issues, and now with inflation and the cost of food rising so much, yeah, I found really any organization in Vancouver that has a food program is at capacity. And we're just finding, like, even today, I'm getting calls from social workers trying to place families with some kind of food program. And it's really difficult when, like, the only answer you can give is we're waitlisted, and like, we'll add you to the list and hopefully can help you out soon. But yeah, I just found that the amount of calls we were getting from people who were like, I've never been in this situation before, but just with inflation and COVID and job loss, stuff like that, just finding that they're suddenly in a position where, yeah, putting food on the table is really unaffordable. So that's definitely a tension we're feeling. Mm-hmm.
And what are your, like, obviously, because it's, it's a growing problem, especially now, like you mentioned, after COVID, like, what are you guys' plans to, like, kind of, like, help that out? Is that by hiring more people, or, like, getting more organizations involved? Like, what are your guys' kind of plans to hopefully end up solving this problem eventually?
Yeah, it's interesting working in the nonprofit sector because you're always trying to work yourself out of a job. Yeah. You're like, I like my job, but also my job relates to this massive problem that I hope isn't around forever. So on our end, we really see the solutions as being further upstream. So us and a lot of other like-minded organizations are doing a lot of emergency food relief, in the sense of we're not providing true food security. Like, if our grants run up or our fundraising runs up, then there's all these households that will suddenly be scrambling to find access to food elsewhere. So we're not a long-term sustainable solution. But we recognize that it's super important to still have that emergency food relief, while at the same time trying to advocate higher up that there needs to be changes in policy, changes that are coming more from a municipal level with the city of Vancouver, or broader than that, provincial, federal, that are really regulating things are like around food security, our food system, but also other challenges. Like, a lot of people become food insecure for other reasons, right? Like, they're on a fixed income. Rent is just getting astronomical when you have a fixed budget, and 3/4 of that is going towards your rent. Then the amount of money you have left over for medication, healthcare, food, like, is so small that we can keep donating out food, but that individual is still going to continue to be food insecure unless there's changes higher up. So in the sense that it's really important to advocate for affordable housing and things like that, because the downstream ripple effects will be that folks are able to afford food regularly, consistently, food they want, have the choice to buy food that they like.
This episode is brought to you by Olive and Ciboulette Lobster Oil. What is lobster oil, you ask? It's pretty much an olive oil, except it's lobster infused. So if you're a seafood lover, if you want to put it on pasta dishes, salad dressing, sauces, you can saute with it. Or you can keep it simple, put it with some balsamic vinaigrette, some lobster oil, and a nice warm baguette. You can find us at www.oliveandciboulette.com.
So we are part of the Vancouver Neighborhood Food Networks. So each neighborhood in Vancouver, and this is a really unique model that's not found elsewhere in North America, actually. So it's pretty cool that Vancouver has this. But each neighborhood has what's called a food network. We're part of the Mount Pleasant Food Network. We're actually the host organization for it. And the idea is to connect like-minded organizations working in the food justice space so that, people aren't falling through the cracks. If someone calls us looking for food, then, I can call someone else in the network and be like, hey, do you have space? Or I can redirect them to whoever. We meet regularly just to share resources and best practices and things like that. But the real idea behind the networks is that most organizations, are just running day-to-day operations. Everyone's plates are full. There's lots going on. It can be hard to find dedicated staff time to work on those more political advocacy challenges. But the idea behind the networks is that there's representatives from each organization who can meet together and start trying to work on those more higher level strategies addressing food security. And the coordinators from each of the neighborhood meet together as well. And yeah, there's a couple food system people that were really connected who work with the city of Vancouver. So just having a direct line to have that impact. So, for example, we hosted a food justice town hall for the municipal elections last fall to have candidates come out and hear from us about the issues that our communities are facing so that they could speak to that and talk about how that might fit into their party's platforms. And now that the city council has been elected and is in, we're working on political briefings where we go back to our community and the people who have lived experience of food insecurity, ask them what their challenges are. We put together these briefings to present to city council to kind of give them an overview of, these are the challenges in the food security world. So that's kind of a long answer, but that's our kind of what we're doing is trying to both continue offering emergency food relief while also trying to tackle challenges higher upstream that will hopefully alleviate some of the downstream challenges that people are having.
And like obviously you guys work again close with like the government and everything, municipality. Like, is it like, do you see much traction going along that way, or is it like kind of an uphill battle a little bit? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think that our food system, food security, food justice, food recovery, the environmental impact, all of these things are big challenges, but they seem largely invisible in the sense that it's not a common concern a lot of Vancouverites think about unless you're being directly affected by food security challenges. So I think there's just kind of a lack of education around food security issues, and so it isn't prioritized as much. Like right now in the city's budget, food systems food security represents about 0.01% of the budget. So that is just a massive problem across the board, is there just isn't funding for groups like us to be doing the work that we're doing. There are definitely people in the city of Vancouver who are in council who care about these issues, but there's just so many other challenges, and food security itself is not being prioritized in the budget.
Which is crazy to think.
Yeah, totally.
That just that's for everybody here. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
So how are you guys tackling these challenges? Are you guys I know you said you guys had a lot of meetings and things like that, but is that really working with them? Do you think do you see much traction coming along for the next year or so with that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge that you have to have a long-term mentality for. You're in it for the long game if you're going to be making any kind of long-term impact. So I think with things like the briefings that we're putting together, it's a first step, right? That to have this prioritized in the City of Vancouver budget, first of all, you need council members to be aware of these challenges. So that's on us to go back to our sector, talk to our community partners, really figure out what are the top 3 priorities that we have, create that briefing, and bring it to city council attention. So yeah, that's one example of things that we're doing. But yeah, across the board, it definitely is. Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I think a first step is really creating that awareness and education around the impact of food waste and food security and stuff like that. But yeah, but we're hopeful, right? I think with inflation, it seems like challenges around our food system are becoming more and more prevalent in media. People are all feeling the pinch of hey, why are my eggs now $8 or $9? Things are becoming really expensive. So I think with that just kind of public awareness, that makes me hopeful that change is going to come. It feels like we're kind of at this moment where it's ripe for change. People are seeing the negative impacts of our food system and wanting things to change. So there's some momentum there. Yeah.
And do you see this problem? Because obviously you're here in British Columbia, but what about other provinces? Are they facing a similar problem as well? Do they have a system like this as well? Can you tell us a little bit more about I know you're mostly focused here, but maybe because I'm sure you network a lot with people within the industry. What do you see other provinces doing to kind of go over this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is really like place specific. Um, Across Canada, food waste is a problem everywhere. Um, definitely not just a BC thing. And the thing is, like, economically, it costs the government about $20 billion a year as well. So like at a federal level, it's definitely seen as a challenge and as a problem. I think in terms of food security in different provinces, that just makes me think again that it's so place specific. So more on the coastal regions, you'll have challenges around sustainability with seafood and the fishing industry, and I think kind of like the breadbasket provinces. There's so much food waste that comes from just like conventional mass scale agriculture. So that's definitely a big driving factor of food waste in Canada. So BC definitely has large farms as well, but just thinking of like the grain industry across the prairies and stuff like that. But yeah, I think Vancouver specifically has the challenge of the cost of housing really impacting people's budget and their ability to afford food, which is seen in other cities like Toronto for sure. And I think rural problems would be just different, yeah, different challenges around supply chain issues. Thinking of a conversation I had with someone working in the Kootenays where, when there was the flooding and it was still COVID and supply chains, and when the roads got closed, it's like 3 days in the grocery store, shelves are bare because the trucks can't come in to deliver food. So it's more of those like isolated rural places that have the like really feel the pinch when there's supply chain issues, which just, speaks to having super long chains between the source of our food and then where we actually access our food is not a sustainable system in the long term. It is really vulnerable and fragile in a lot of ways.
Interesting. And like the location of Food Stash, is it like kind of like a giant warehouse and you guys have like fridges and things like can you tell us a little bit more about like what's the inside of it? Obviously that'd be kind of cool.
Yes. Yeah, so we just moved to a new warehouse location in September, so we're tucked kind of behind Terminal Ave. We've got a fairly large warehouse space. We have 2 walk-in fridges, a walk-in freezer. We share a warehouse space with a bunch of different organizations. So we share space with Growing Chefs and Cycling Without Age, different groups that have kind of like-minded perspectives and just need a little bit of space because space in this city is at a premium. But yeah, we do have our warehouse and the fleet of trucks we have. We've got 3 trucks. Come in and out each day to drop off food or pick up food to redistribute it to our community partners. So it's a very active warehouse. Like, we're not a huge team. There's about 15 of us on staff, about 12 full-time. And yeah, I was just in there today doing a volunteer session, packaging food boxes. And it just feels so full of life because there's so many people in and out from different organizations coming to pick up food. So it's a pretty busy warehouse, but yeah, it's definitely cool to see how much we've grown from the early days of just one guy in a van.
I think that's so cool. And do you guys do like can people come volunteer at all like at the warehouse and like sort and things like that? Do you guys have any programs similar to that?
Yeah, so when we collect food from grocery stores, it's all just jumbled together. So we have a big sort every Monday where volunteers come in and help us just organize the food. So putting apples with apples, oranges with oranges, that kind of thing. That makes the rest of our programming for the rest of the week easier. So we have our big food sort, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we have volunteers come in and package the food bags that go out for delivery. And Thursdays are our market days. So we have 2 groups of volunteers who will come in for the kind of opening shift, the closing shift, and help us run the market. So yeah, there's volunteer opportunities Monday through Friday. We have a really great pool of volunteers. We love them a lot. They do so much. Like, we couldn't operate without their help. And it's just really fun working with people who are so passionate. And a lot of people volunteer with us because they're interested in food in some way. So there's always people bringing in food to share or recipe sharing, or yeah, it's just a really lovely bunch.
That's awesome. And if people wanted to volunteer, like, is there space for them to come, or are you guys kind of fully booked for that?
No, absolutely. There's space. Yeah. So if you go to our website and click on the volunteer link, they'll put you in touch with Jen, who's our volunteer coordinator, and she can slot people in. So yeah, we're always looking for new volunteers.
Maybe tell us the website, just so people can search it up if they listen. That'd be great.
Yeah, you can head to foodstash.ca.
Cool. That was great.
Yeah.
Now, like, my last question I gotta ask you, like, so what, like, drives you to work for Food Stash? Like, why do you, wake up every day and get motivated? Because it is, like, a long-term battle, like you mentioned. Like, what is it that motivates you so much to keep on going?
Yeah, I think working with a really passionate and caring team makes a big difference when you're working with people who are really excited about the same mission and just make it a really lovely work environment. That's a big thing. Also just, yeah, like really it's so motivating to work in a sector where you see that direct impact. You know that, because you are helping to package these food boxes, that you're both reducing food waste and then also you're enabling somebody to have food that week. So that direct impact with the community is super motivating. And it's just really fun working in the community development space. You get to work with so many organizations who have really cool missions, and you get to work directly in the community and see that positive change. So it's kind of all of those things. It just makes going to work really fun because you're making a difference and you're just surrounded by people who are motivated by the same things as you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And do you think, like, I guess everybody that kind of works with you guys kind of see that vision as well, right? Like, I guess it's just a really good community. What would you say in your position has been, like, the most challenging part of your day-to-day job?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the most challenging parts kind of across the board is the lack of funding, that it feels like you're always trying to find grants that you can secure, fundraising opportunities. It's that challenge, right, where that you're doing good work, but to make that sustainable work that you can have over the long term when funding is often tricky to secure. That's just, I think, a challenge for any organization like us. In my personal role, I think challenges, for any of us, I guess, when you're working in any kind of frontline capacity, it can have its days where it's super hard. Like you're working with, folks who may have really complex mental health conditions going on, really challenging circumstances going on. And there can just be a lot of challenges that come with that. And at the same time, though, it can be really rewarding to do that frontline work because you're seeing that direct impact. But yeah, I'd say that's one of the bigger challenges. And even just seeing, the volume of people that need help and knowing that there's people falling through the cracks because there just isn't enough support systems in place like that. Yeah, that's definitely an emotional challenge that I think all of us in this kind of sector face.
Right. Well, again, I know this was like kind of short on time, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah,
is there any like is there maybe something, like, I know you said the website, but is there maybe like another way or another website that you want to like kind of shout out to our huge audience that we have? Maybe.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to share?
Yeah. I think if people want to learn more about food waste and food security in Canada, I would encourage people to go to secondharvest.ca. They're the largest research group. Like, they're the ones who are doing the bulk of the research that's showing these stats, like 58% of food in Canada goes to waste. That was done by Second Harvest Study. So they're a really awesome resource at a national level. And I will also plug City Beat Farm really quick. So they are just opening up more spaces. They're looking for houses, homeowners in Mount Pleasant who would be interested in having their lawn space converted into urban agriculture. So they come and they would farm the plot for you, and then you get fresh produce every week, and the other produce goes out to support food insecure households and different, community-based food programs. So they're a really cool group, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just cool to see gardening become this like radical tool to fight food insecurity. So I know they are looking for spaces and homeowners in Mount Pleasant. So I'll give them a shout out.
Cool. Thank you so much. That's so cool, actually. I never knew that was like a thing. But
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, if anybody has space, you know who to call.
Yeah.
Thanks again for coming on, and thank you
Yeah,
guys for
anytime.
listening. Awesome.